By mid-1942, the course of World War II began to shift dramatically. After years of German dominance in Europe and early victories in North Africa, the Allies were finally finding ways to counter the seemingly unstoppable Axis forces. The Battle of Midway had shown that intelligence, strategy, and sheer determination could overturn expectations, and the Atlantic convoys began to outmaneuver U-boats threatening critical supplies. In Europe, the Eastern Front saw its own pivotal changes. The German advance into the Soviet Union had been relentless, but the harsh winter of 1941 to 42 and stiffening Soviet resistance slowed their progress. Cities like Stalingrad became epicenters of fierce combat, where the determination of soldiers and civilians alike forced the Germans into costly engagements. Each lost tank, plane, and supply convoy chipped away at their previously unshakable confidence. On the Western Front, American and British forces were ramping up production, sending more planes, ships, and equipment to support the Allies abroad. Factories in Detroit and across the U.S. churned out thousands of aircraft and armored vehicles, giving soldiers in Europe and the Pacific the tools to match German and Japanese equipment. The sheer industrial output began to tilt the strategic balance in favor of the Allies. Leadership decisions also played a critical role. Commanders who had learned from early mistakes implemented new tactics, coordinated better with allies, and used intelligence more effectively. The breaking of German codes and the interception of key communications allowed the Allies to anticipate attacks and plan countermeasures that would save thousands of lives and preserve momentum. The turning point wasn't a single battle or moment, but a convergence of factors: relentless Allied production, resilient resistance, intelligence breakthroughs, and strategic planning. The Axis powers could no longer rely on momentum alone. The war was entering a phase where resourcefulness, coordination, and adaptation determined victory. By the end of 1942, the world was witnessing the shift. The tide of war, once seemingly unstoppable in favor of the Axis, was turning. The Allies were no longer on the defensive. They were beginning to reclaim the initiative, setting the stage for decisive campaigns to come. Victory was no longer a distant hope. It was a tangible goal within reach. By late 1942, the dangers of arrogance and miscalculation were becoming painfully clear to the Axis powers. German commanders, accustomed to rapid victories in Europe, underestimated the resilience of both their enemies and the challenges of extended campaigns. In North Africa, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's forces had advanced. By late 1942, the dangers of arrogance and miscalculation were becoming painfully clear to the Axis powers. German commanders, accustomed to rapid victories in Europe, underestimated the resilience of both their enemies and the challenges of extended campaigns. In North Africa, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's forces had advanced impressively, but logistical overreach, fuel shortages, and the growing strength of British and Commonwealth troops began to stall the Afrika Korps. The very confidence that had fueled early successes now blinded leadership to the risks accumulating on multiple fronts. In the Soviet Union, the German High Command believed that Moscow and Stalingrad would fall swiftly, underestimating the determination and numbers of the Red Army. Harsh winter conditions, supply shortages, and fierce Soviet resistance turned the campaign into a grinding battle of attrition. Units that had once moved with precision now suffered staggering casualties. Overconfidence had led to extended lines, vulnerable flanks, and exhausted troops who faced the brutal consequences of misjudgment. Meanwhile, in the skies over Europe, the Luftwaffe's assumptions about Allied capabilities proved disastrous. German pilots had underestimated the production capacity and tactical innovation of American and British forces. Strategic bombers escorted by long-range fighters challenged German air superiority, forcing the Luftwaffe to stretch its resources thin while suffering irreplaceable losses. Arrogance in assuming air dominance had led directly to weakened positions and mounting casualties. Even in the Pacific, Japanese overconfidence mirrored these mistakes. Early victories had given commanders a sense of invincibility, leading to underestimating Allied industrial output and logistical depth. Battles such as Guadalcanal highlighted how arrogance could result in overextended supply lines, poorly reinforced positions, and ultimately, strategic failure. The price of overconfidence was severe: lost territory, decimated divisions, and shattered morale. Each miscalculation reinforced a painful lesson: no victory, however swift or. By 1943, the skies above Europe had become a relentless battlefield, a sky of steel, where the outcome of the war was increasingly determined. American and British bombers flew in massive formations, their wings cutting through clouds as anti-aircraft fire and Luftwaffe fighters awaited below. Each mission was a deadly gamble, with crews aware that one mistake could mean destruction. The roar of engines and the staccato of gunfire became the new symphony of war, echoing across the continent. The B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator dominated the strategic bombing campaigns, carrying thousands of pounds of explosives aimed at crippling German industry and supply lines. Escorting them, the P-51 Mustang and P-38 Lightning pushed Luftwaffe fighters to their limits, engaging in dogfights that were both deadly and precise. The sheer scale of the aerial operations required coordination that had never been attempted before in military history. On the ground, German anti-aircraft units worked tirelessly to defend cities, factories, and military installations. Flak cannons fired relentless streams of shells into the sky, creating deadly clouds of shrapnel. Pilots had to navigate not only enemy fighters but also the invisible threat of these exploding projectiles, adding another layer of tension to every mission. Crews endured long hours at high altitude, battling freezing temperatures, oxygen shortages, and fatigue. Yet morale was maintained by camaraderie and the belief that each completed mission was a step toward victory. Maps, radio communications, and tactical planning were essential, with every decision potentially saving lives or dooming aircraft. By late 1943, the Sky of Steel had claimed many, but it also revealed the growing strength of Allied air power. Production lines on the ground continued to feed the war effort, ensuring a steady flow of planes and trained crews. The dominance of the Luftwaffe was increasingly challenged, signaling a pivotal shift in the balance of power. The sky, once dominated by German aircraft, was now contested fiercely and inescapably, marking a turning point in the air war over Europe. By 1943, the scale of Allied production and innovation in World War II had reached unprecedented heights, creating what many called engineering miracles. American factories, supported by skilled workers and cutting-edge machinery, churned out thousands of aircraft, tanks, and ships at a pace that astounded even military planners. The B-29 Superfortress, massive Liberty ships, and Sherman tanks were no longer theoretical designs. They were rolling off assembly lines with astonishing speed and precision. Behind these achievements were engineers, designers, and workers solving problems that had never before existed on such a scale. Blueprints were translated into real machines capable of operating under extreme combat conditions. Riveters, welders, and mechanics labored in massive industrial halls, often around the clock, turning raw materials into instruments of war. Women like Rosie the Riveter became symbols of this unprecedented effort, their skill and determination keeping production lines running flawlessly. Innovation extended beyond factories. Engineers developed more efficient assembly methods, standardized parts for rapid repair, and introduced technologies that enhanced aircraft speed, armor, and firepower. Radar systems, advanced bomb sights, and long-range engines were the result of tireless experimentation and coordination between military planners and industrial experts. Every plane and tank represented the combined intellect and labor of thousands, a testament to what humanity could achieve under pressure. The engineering miracles of the Allies were not just technical triumphs, they were strategic ones. With each bomber leaving the factory and each tank rolling onto the battlefield, the balance of power shifted steadily. German and Japanese planners could not match the scale, speed, or reliability of these outputs, no matter how skilled their pilots or soldiers were. The ingenuity and industrial might of the Allies became as crucial a weapon as any rifle or artillery shell. By 1944, the results were undeniable. The war was being fought not only by men in battle but also by the engineers, workers, and innovators who turned ambition into reality. The engineering miracles of the era demonstrated that organized skill, determination, and technological excellence could change the course of history, proving that human creativity could be as decisive as any strategy or army. During World War II, the triumphs of the Allied air forces were built not just in the skies, but on the factory floors back home. The B-17 Flying Fortress, the B-24 Liberator, and countless fighter planes depended on. During World War II, the triumphs of the Allied air forces were built not just in the skies, but on the factory floors back home. The B-17 Flying Fortress, the B-24 Liberator, and countless fighter planes depended on thousands of workers who toiled behind the scenes, assembling wings, riveting fuselages, installing engines, and testing every system with meticulous care. These men and women formed the backbone of the war effort, often laboring long hours in noisy, cramped, and exhausting conditions. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, filling roles traditionally held by men who had gone to the front. Known collectively as Rosie the Riveter, these women became the symbols of determination and skill, handling heavy machinery, operating rivet guns, and ensuring every plane met strict military specifications. Each rivet, bolt, and panel mattered. A single mistake could compromise the lives of pilots flying into combat thousands of miles away. Factories were alive with activity from dawn to dusk, and many ran 24-hour shifts to meet the relentless demand for aircraft. Engineers, draftsmen, and mechanics worked alongside assembly line operators, solving problems on the spot, redesigning parts to improve performance, and keeping production moving. Teamwork and dedication were essential, and a shared sense of purpose created bonds between co-workers who knew their work directly affected the outcome of the war. Beyond the technical aspects, the factories were a testament to human endurance and morale. Despite fatigue, accidents, and the constant pressure of deadlines, the workers persevered, inspired by the idea that each completed plane represented a contribution to victory. Their efforts ensured that the skies over Europe and the Pacific were filled with machines capable of matching and eventually surpassing Axis air power. The story of the workers behind the wings is a story of courage, ingenuity, and unrecognized. By 1944, the world that Hermann Göring had once controlled with swagger and bluster began to slip from his grasp. Once the confident commander of the Luftwaffe, he now faced mounting failures in the skies over Europe. The massive American and British bomber formations, supported by long-range fighters, dominated the skies, inflicting devastating losses on German cities, factories, and airfields. The arrogance that had fueled his early boasts was replaced by a tense, heavy silence. Inside the Reich Air Ministry, meetings grew quieter. Göring's officers no longer hung on his every word with the same unquestioning reverence. Reports of lost aircraft, depleted pilots, and faltering defense systems filled the room, leaving little room for the jokes and boasts that had once defined his leadership. The Führer's impatience with failures intensified the pressure, and Göring found himself unable to offer the bold reassurances he had once used to command loyalty and confidence. Meanwhile, Allied production surged relentlessly. The United States was producing planes, tanks, and bombers at rates the Luftwaffe could not match. Each new aircraft over Europe symbolized the growing imbalance of power. Göring, once the face of German air supremacy, now struggled to maintain morale, his own silence betraying the severity of the situation. He had underestimated the industrial might and strategic planning of the Allies, and the consequences were now unavoidable. On the front lines, German pilots faced increasingly coordinated attacks. The sky was no longer theirs. Each mission carried high risk, with many failing to return. Communication lines to the Reich were filled with grim statistics, yet Göring's earlier confidence offered no solution. His silence was both a personal acknowledgement of failure and a signal to the Luftwaffe that the tide of war had shifted irrevocably. Göring's silence became a symbol of the turning point in the air war. The bravado of early victories had faded, replaced by a sober recognition that the Allies' combined industrial, technological, and strategic power had created a new reality. No longer laughing at American plans, Göring faced a quiet truth. The era of Luftwaffe dominance was ending, and with it, his once unshakable authority and reputation. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe, once the pride and terror of the Third Reich, was a shadow of its former self. Years of intense aerial combat, combined with relentless Allied bombing campaigns, had drained Germany's air force of experienced pilots, advanced aircraft, and crucial resources. What had once seemed invincible was now overextended, understrength, and struggling to defend the Reich from a relentless enemy that had grown stronger with every passing month. The massive Allied bombing campaigns over German cities and industrial centers revealed the stark reality. The Luftwaffe could no longer maintain air superiority. Factories producing aircraft were targeted relentlessly, reducing output and delaying replacements for lost planes. Each sortie faced increasingly sophisticated opposition from Allied fighters and long-range bombers, while flak defenses could no longer compensate for dwindling numbers. The losses were mounting at a pace Germany could not match. Training new pilots could not keep up with battlefield attrition. Many young, inexperienced aviators were thrown into combat against seasoned Allied crews, leading to catastrophic losses. Veterans, who had once inspired confidence and led daring missions, were fewer each month, leaving command structures weakened and morale fractured. Even Göring, once brimming with confidence, could offer little hope as reports of destruction, attrition, and logistical failure piled onto his desk. The Luftwaffe's fall was accelerated by technological stagnation. While the Allies refined long-range fighters, radar-guided interception, and coordinated bombing strategies, Germany struggled to deploy jet aircraft, rockets, and other advanced designs in meaningful numbers. Air tactics that had once terrified Europe became obsolete, and the skies that had symbolized German might were now dominated by Allied power. By the winter of 1944 to 45, the fall of the Luftwaffe was undeniable. Cities burned, factories lay in ruins, and the few remaining pilots fought with bravery but little hope. Germany's once proud air force, the centerpiece of its early war dominance, had been undone by attrition, industrial superiority of the Allies, and strategic miscalculations. The Luftwaffe's collapse marked not just the end of German air supremacy, but a turning point in the war itself, signaling that the Reich's final defeat was approaching. By early 1945, the skies over Europe had become a relentless battlefield, dominated by the overwhelming might of Allied air power. Bombers, escorted by fighter planes, rained destruction down on German cities, factories, and supply lines with precision and intensity. This fire from the heavens was not random chaos. It was the culmination of years of planning, intelligence, and industrial effort that turned air raids into decisive instruments of war. The destruction was total and calculated. Industrial complexes that had once supplied tanks, aircraft, and weapons were reduced to smoldering ruins, crippling Germany's ability to sustain its war effort. Railways, bridges, and fuel depots were prime targets, severing the lifelines that connected frontline troops to essential resources. Each bomb dropped from the sky represented not only material loss but also a blow to morale, signaling the inevitability of defeat. German civilians bore the brunt of this relentless assault. Cities like Dresden, Hamburg, and Berlin experienced devastation on an unimaginable scale, with firestorms consuming entire neighborhoods. Families were uprooted, and the constant drone of bombers overhead became a psychological weapon, as fear and uncertainty spread alongside physical destruction. The war was no longer confined to the battlefield. It had entered homes, schools, and streets, transforming daily life into a test of endurance. Despite the chaos, German air defenses tried to respond. Flak batteries fired tirelessly, and fighter squadrons scrambled to intercept incoming raids. Yet numbers alone could not counter the sheer scale of Allied production and coordination. Experienced pilots were scarce, aircraft were in short supply, and new recruits lacked the training and experience needed to stem the tide. The skies, once under German control, were now dominated by overwhelming Allied forces. Fire from the heavens became both a literal and symbolic expression of the changing war. It demonstrated the devastating effectiveness of strategic bombing and the growing supremacy of the Allies in both air and industrial warfare. By the spring of 1945, the relentless aerial assaults had hastened Germany's collapse, proving that the combination of technology, manpower, and strategy from above could bring even the mightiest empire to its knees. During World War II, the United States industrial might became a decisive weapon, often called the machine that won the war. From sprawling factories in Detroit, Chicago, and Pittsburgh, the production of tanks, aircraft, ships, and weapons reached an unprecedented scale, far outpacing the Axis powers. This industrial engine did more than supply troops. It shaped the very course of the conflict, turning American factories into battlefields of their own. Every assembly line operated with precision and urgency. Thousands of workers, including men drafted into service and women who had joined the workforce in unprecedented numbers, collaborated to produce reliable, cutting-edge machinery. Tanks rolled off conveyor belts, bombers were assembled by skilled hands, and naval vessels were launched into the oceans, ready to support the Allies in every theater of war. Each piece of equipment represented the collective effort of engineers, designers, and laborers working in harmony. The impact of this industrial output was felt across Europe and the Pacific. On the front lines, Allied soldiers relied on American-built equipment to face numerically or technologically superior enemies. The Sherman tank, B-17 bomber, and Liberty ship were not mere tools. They were symbols of sustained supply, resilience, and tactical advantage. German and Japanese forces found themselves overwhelmed, not just by strategy, but by sheer numbers and quality of material. Innovation and organization were key. Production techniques were continually refined, standardizing parts, improving efficiency, and reducing time from blueprint to battlefield. Technological breakthroughs, from radar to advanced engines, were integrated rapidly, ensuring that American machinery was often superior to its Axis counterparts. Each completed unit meant more than physical firepower. It represented the ability to sustain long campaigns and adapt to evolving warfare conditions. By the war's end, historians recognized that the industrial machine of the United States had been as decisive as any battle or strategy. Its capacity to produce, innovate, and supply unmatched resources allowed the Allies to fight relentlessly on multiple fronts, overwhelming enemies and turning the tide of the war. In many ways, this machine, an army of factories, workers, and engineers, was the true engine of victory, proving that production and organization could win a war as surely as courage and tactics. Hermann Göring's infamous laughter at the American plan to build 50,000 planes became a symbol of arrogance and miscalculation during World War II. In Berlin, Göring and his inner circle mocked the ambitious industrial goals of the United States, certain that German air power was unassailable. His derisive humor, meant to project confidence, masked a dangerous underestimation of Allied capabilities and industrial potential. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, American factories were already mobilizing on an unprecedented scale. Engineers, designers, and workers transformed raw materials into aircraft with remarkable speed. Detroit's auto plants, converted into war production centers, were producing planes in quantities that would soon overwhelm the Luftwaffe. Every plane rolled off the assembly line as a silent rebuttal to Göring's scoffing, each machine a testament to American ingenuity and determination. As Allied bombers began to dominate the skies, the laughter in Berlin became increasingly hollow. The once confident Luftwaffe faced relentless pressure from long-range bombers and well-escorted fighter formations. Every air raid demonstrated that American production was more than a number on paper. It was a force reshaping the war. Göring's misjudgment was not merely personal pride. It represented a broader failure of German leadership to anticipate the industrial scale of their adversary. By 1944, the legacy of a laugh had tangible consequences. Cities, factories, and transportation hubs across Germany suffered devastating damage, and the Luftwaffe struggled to respond. Pilots, engineers, and anti-aircraft units faced the reality that American air power was unstoppable. Göring's mockery, once a symbol of hubris, had inadvertently highlighted the critical role of industrial strength in modern warfare. The story of that laughter endures as a cautionary tale. Overconfidence, ridicule, and underestimation of an opponent can have profound consequences. What began as a moment of arrogance in Berlin ultimately fueled the determination of the Allies, leaving Göring's jest as a bitter echo in the corridors of a defeated regime. The laugh became a legacy, not of triumph, but of misjudgment and the unstoppable rise of American industry.